I think we're good. Okay. It's as good as it's gonna get.
Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Good evening. So nice to see everyone. This talk that I have for tonight is based on an old talk I gave here. I remember a long time ago when I first ordained, my teacher saying that most good teachers really only have 2 or 3 Dharma talks. They just keep elaborating on it again and again and again. So this is a theme that I like, and then I'll come back to again and again and again. The talk is titled, What Do We Really Need? And the first version of this I gave on June 18th, 2014. So 9 years old-ish, at least the notes I'm working from. And June 18th, 2014 was right around the time that Dharma Ring was moving. So it was that summer that we moved out of our old location, just off of Hawthorne in Portland, and moved out to this property that was full of blackberries and weeds and had been overrun for a couple of decades. We moved into 2 rental houses, and we had our Sunday morning service in an elementary school cafeteria. So all of our Zendo stuff was packed up in a trailer that was stored on the property. And every Sunday we would trundle it out to the elementary school or the middle school. I don't even know what school it is. It's an elementary school. Recently. Recently? Elementary? Yeah. Okay. It's been a long time. We would trundle it all out there, and people would show up and help us unpack it. Set up a Zendo, set up a Sanzen room. Zendo was in the cafeteria. Sanzen room was in the band closet, I believe. I had my Shusoho on there. Yes, and the floor was always sticky. So this question of what do we really need was very, very poignant and very present at that time. In the midst of this transition, going from a situation where we had been well established in a location for decades, going into a situation that we knew was going to be temporary. We were going to build, but nothing had been built yet. We had a vision, but nothing had manifested yet. We had boxes, but no one was really sure what was in those boxes. It was a chaotic time and an exciting time. And in thinking about this, everyone was still alive at that time. A while ago. So I was looking at that question of what do we really need? I'm looking at that again tonight, adding some depth to it. So I want to offer up a duality, or perhaps a spectrum. Dualities, as we know in Buddhism, especially in Zen, are often a conceptual construct. So we're going to start off with a conceptual construct. We're going to start off with this duality of asceticism and indulgence. And we can think of, or for the purpose of this talk, define asceticism as practicing strict self-denial as a measure of personal and especially spiritual discipline. And that definition is coming from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. So on this one hand, discipline. And that can show up in practice as controlled or controlling meditation, food, sleep, personal possessions, perhaps dropping away of personal relationships, holding on to the idea that increasing suffering will create purity or enlightenment. We must restrict and pare away so that things will be hard, and therefore, because things are hard, something good will come of it. And this leaning towards asceticism, or leaning towards this desire to pare away, often comes with a sudden shift of perspective. It may come after a significant transition point in someone's life, that they move, a divorce, a death, something changes, and there's this impulse to simplify. Often a rigid sense of a need to simplify. On the other hand, on the other end of this duality, we have indulgence, which we can define as to yield to the desires and the whims, to gratify, or to allow unrestrained gratification. Looking at that definition of asceticism, indulgence sounds pretty darn good, doesn't it? Leaning into those cookies. And this can show up in practice as perhaps an inconsistency in formal practice. Practicing as long as it feels good and then stopping. So creating a sense of breadth in practice, but not necessarily depth. Could show up as passivity instead of practice. Just going with the flow. Could show up as arrogance or pride. We're perfect already, so there's no need to improve. Or we're never going to make it, so I try. Indulging in those opinions of how we stack up, how we compare. And indulgence can show up as becoming self-congratulatory. I'm such a good Zen student. I showed up in person for this job. And so then the question arises, how do we find this balance of these things? How do we find a middle point along this spectrum, or a middle point perhaps, in the midst of this duality? I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the way I was trained as a monk, just as a way to illustrate some of this. And it's not necessarily strictly only about monastic practice, but one of the things that monks are traditionally given, I'm always careful with that word, but one of the things provided by the Sangha was called the four requisites. And these are often referred to in the Pali Canon, but I don't know if there's a specific sutta that is describing these four requisites. But they're the four things that are given to monastics. And that's food, things that nourish the body, clothing, keeps us warm and dignified, shelter, which protects us from the elements, and medicine that prevents illness and disease. And so when I was first ordained, when I did my novice training, these were the things that were provided. These are things that are still provided to novice monks. Food, clothing, shelter, medicine. The basics. And in our practice, in our Zen practice, we strike a balance between indulgence and asceticism. And this is the middle way that the Buddha talks about so often. Balance between discipline and laxity. On each end we can err, on each end we can grasp at and create a thing out of something that has no real form. In our zazen, we sit still, reining in body and mind despite all of the many impulses that arise and urge us to do otherwise. In shikantaza, we watch our thoughts and our sensory experiences arise and fall, without getting entangled in stories, opinions, or judgments. We're doing concentration practices. We focus on the object of our concentration without letting our attention waver. And when it does, we bring it gently back on track. And Sesshin provides a week-long amount of time to engage these restraints, these little bits between asceticism and indulgence. We sit for a week, and then we put them down. It's very important and it's very useful to go deeply into practice, but we can't live there. We take what we learn from the cushion and bring it back into the world, not through proselytizing, but through our actions, embodying our understanding of Dharma. And then Sangha also provides some balance between asceticism and indulgence. By being in and with others, we have to give up some of our preferences. We have to give up some of our opinions. We don't always get our way. We don't always decide how long we sit before the bell rings. And on the flip side, we often want to make others comfortable. We create opportunities for our own comfort when we step up to invite others in and help them be comfortable as well. So these social norms, these Sangha norms, our cultures can bring us into a little bit of this middle way between asceticism and indulgence. We sit in rows, but we also provide instruction. Some of us wear vestments, but it's not required. People can wear what they're comfortable to wear. It's both and. So stepping back a little bit towards monastic practice. When I ordained, I took a set of vows as a priest. And this also ties into the book that we're reading, written by Vow. The vows that I took when I ordained are thus. I vow to walk the path of the Buddha, living an ethical life and becoming enlightened. I vow to study the Dharma, working to see the true nature of all things and all I encounter, all beings I encounter. I vow to help the Sangha, practicing generosity with all my resources. I vow to live a life of simplicity, holding few personal possessions. I vow to live a life of service, working to nurture others' deepest aspirations. I vow to live a life of stability, honoring commitments with patience and tolerance, remaining steadfast in practice and relationships. And like the precepts, these vows help create a framework or a container that keeps the other monks from leaning too far into asceticism or too far into indulgence. There's a little bit of wiggle room. Those vows have space in them. Those vows have fluidity in them to allow leaning into practice, also to allow some structure. The monks can't just do whatever they want. And it would be easy to just do what we like. Practice can be challenging. Sometimes we need that challenge to step up, to lean in, to go further. Having an ideal or having an aspiration can be important. Allowing oneself to be guided in practice, as opposed to thinking, oh, I know how to do this. I don't need anybody else's help. We always need help. But all of this talk of this versus that, these aspects of vows, these aspects of practice, Sangha, Sesshin, Zazen, haven't yet answered that question, what do we need? In a way, each of us has to answer that for ourselves. Perhaps changing that we to an I need. And keeping in mind that the answer will change over time. Sometimes we need others to create a strict, disciplined container for us. Welcoming the forms and the structures, finding support for our intentions and our practice. And at other times, the forms can feel stifling. They can become stale. And we need more variation, we need more freedom to breathe life back into our practice. But that still doesn't answer the question, because it's not yet a complete question. So I'll reframe it as what is needed right now. This points towards a moment-to-moment environment, one in which the impermanence of all things, the self, things of the world, and the dissatisfaction of this non-permanence is seen, anicca, anatta, dukkha. The three marks of existence are found moment to moment. Finding liberation happens moment to moment. And when we ask that question, what is needed right now, we can add depth to it. In asking, who is the self that is asking? Who is this self this moment? Because the self of this moment is not the same as the self of last moment, or the self of 10 years ago. The self that made those vows on the night of my ordination saw them as big and vast, and oh my goodness, what am I committing to? What is this going to look like? The self that reads those vows now recognizes this is home. This is in the bones now. Somewhere between then and now, myriads of selves have arisen and fallen away. And we can let those past selves go. Sometimes we talk about letting the self of the moment die. As the next moment arises, the next self arises. So then that question of what is needed right now is fresh and new, as each self is fresh and new. And that in itself can become a little stepping stone as we traverse this life that we have moment by moment. A new step. What self is this? What is needed? Another step. What self is this? What is needed? Asking that becomes important, because if we get too attached to aspirations or goals or vows and only think of them one way, the way I meet this must look like X, then the life has gone out of it. So to keep the life in the practice, to keep that vibrancy, requires that question. What is needed right now? Here is this vow. How do I relate? Who is doing the relating? What does it mean? That's so beautiful because it can get us out of those concepts, those ideas, those it must be, or it should be, or I'm not doing it right, or my practice doesn't look like somebody else's practice. When we do this, our practice and our life are no longer two different things. It's all the same unfolding. All the same flavor. And it constantly changes. So, as I wrap up this short talk, I would encourage you to reflect for a second on your life, on your practice, and ask yourself, given the context that you find yourself in, what is needed right now?
What was your last question?
What is needed right now?
Right. Okay. Thought there was something.
Can you tell us what self is asking?
Maybe. that's what you heard, we can go with that.
Must even have heard that question.
That's a beautiful talk.
Yeah.
It's so lovely. The question, what is needed right now is feels really valuable and simple. It's a great question and helpful, really helpful. You know, for times of stress or anything, great question. Just stop and ask yourself. Thank you so much for that. And the topic of asceticism versus indulgence is a moving boundary, really something I ask myself all the time. And I was just talking to Sean about doing this session online, and it was very much for me, very much found this beautiful in this way. It's like, wasn't effortless. There was a lot of effort, but it wasn't, I didn't feel it was self-punishing either.
Hmm.
Thank you.
I was wondering how session was for those who went.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was different for everybody, of course.
course,
For me,
yeah.
it was really, really wonderful.
Since this is a small group, I'm happy to have it be more discussion than questions.
So when I ask, what do I need now? Then the answer comes up, nothing. Right now, I might in a few minutes, but right now, nothing.
Thanks.
It feels nice.
I was just gonna say, how does it feel? For me, I often can lean into a sense of contentment with that question of what is needed right now. If there really isn't anything pulling at me, it can just feel so very satisfying and content.
Which leads me to a lot of gratitude,
Mm.
which is something that I cultivate a lot.
Mhm.
And then I realized I don't need much of anything.
I really like this question. I use it a lot in my work in the hospital. In that when I go into the patient's room, whether I'm talking to a patient or their family, I really do have that question of just what is needed right now. And I even take that I out of it. Because it's not what do I need, but what does this encounter need? And maybe it needs me to listen. Maybe it needs some direction. Maybe it needs some ideas. Maybe it needs some empathy. And I don't know. I don't know until I remember to stop and ask that question and pay attention. And let myself be informed by the context. It's not necessarily me thinking, oh, I've got it figured out. I know what this thing means. I know what sort of interaction we're going to have. Never know. Just show up and see.
It really pares it down. The question just simplifies everything. I mean, sometimes what is needed right now is sleep.
Mhm.
You know? And honestly, that's a real need. Sometimes when everything feels fragmented and chaotic, that's what's needed. You know, or some food or.
And what can happen is when asked that way, and you see that as a need, that moral judgment of it falls away as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't become I should or I shouldn't, or I've slept too much already, or it's just what's needed.
Yeah, it's magic.
What if you perceive a need and are capable of meeting?
I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh, what if you perceive a need and aren't capable of meeting it?
And then what happens?
I just was like, that's where the shoulds come up for me. Either it works out or it doesn't. I don't know, if I can't do something, then I don't do something.
Mhm. And then there might be an arising of the self that understands there's a need that's not being met. And then arising of the self that understands that part of what that self is doing is looking out for the possibility of when that need might be able to be met. And then there's a self that arises that recognizes conditions have changed and it might be possible to meet that. And then there's a self that gets to rest.
Yeah.
Moment after moment after moment. Self after self after self. And when we don't grab on to a former self, we let that self die away. We can just make the moment fresh.
Really hard to not, I don't know, to miss the shoulds, like. Should is such a, like, I should meet needs.
Yeah. But holding shoulds creates distress.
Makes it harder.
And also being in a situation where you recognize needs aren't being met creates distress. And all of this is pointing to we live in samsara, that this is dukkha. This is an experience of dukkha. Both the shoulds and the needs not being met. So maybe you lean a little bit to the asceticism side and sort of hold that, okay, this isn't going to be met right now, without attaching to it and putting I'm suffering, aren't I a good person for suffering? And when the opportunity for rest comes, I'm still on this idea of rest. You can lean into that without grabbing onto the shoulds or grasping after the indulgence. But it doesn't mean don't enjoy. Don't enjoy. Sometimes we can get wrapped up in this idea of if something feels good, it must be wrong, which there's definitely a thread in Zen of the joy of spontaneity and the excitement of just being, of thriving. There's so much humor in it. Sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes.
It's not always easy to tell where that moving boundary is between indulgence and asceticism.
Yeah. Sometimes you can close one eye and it looks like asceticism, and you can close the other eye and it looks like indulgence.
Yeah, and the cells will start arguing about that.
Yeah. And then you can say, thinking.
Yeah.
Let's get out of the head and just experience. What does the body say?
What is the body?
Uh-huh.
But if it means sleep, or you think it means sleep, but you can't go to sleep. Then, for me, a lot comes up as like acceptance. Okay, I want to go to sleep. I want to go to sleep. I can't go to sleep. The harder I try, the less that is going to happen. So I'm not going to die if you miss my sleep. You're going to be fine. Just accept it, and just let your mind go wild. Do what it wants to do. Think. Sometimes it's hard to accept these places.
When you're speaking about that, Trish, what came to mind for me is usually about once a week, I have an overnight shift at the hospital. And in between trauma calls, I've got a place I can sleep. And there are times when I'm in the call room trying to sleep and I can't fall asleep. And I know that stinking pager is going to buzz at any point, so I need to get as much rest as I can. And I can't fall asleep. And so then that acceptance becomes important. Okay, I'm not falling asleep. What is needed right now? What can I do to relax the body? And so perhaps I'll lay in the bed and do a body scan or do some sort of other meditation. And just, okay, the mind's not going to sleep. Can I let the body rest? Okay, sometimes that works. What I try not to do is perseverate on the last person I saw, and maybe I should get up and look in their chart to see if these new things have come in, and if the social worker put their note in, and like, or if so-and-so's moved to another room, and that's later.
And that goes back to what I think you said that I really like, and I was thinking about it when you, that's before you said, what do I need, what is needed right now? And we said, like, yes, that just resonated with me because that's what you have to go back to right now. Doesn't mean next hour or tomorrow you can feel the same way. Right now, I really like that. Just kind of staying in the present.
I think for me, it came up in session a lot, was just surrendering to the moment instead of resisting, just really surrendering. You know, that first couple days is kind of miserable sometimes. And once you surrender to being there, then it seems like it really eases up and just taking care of what you need in the moment. It looks like we lost them. And it says I'm the host now. And it's still recording, so I'm not sure if they can hear us. Let me do a chat. Hmm.
It's like, sorry, we got disconnected from Wi-Fi.
And then you're unmuted.
And then we were muted. Okay, we're back.
Okay.
Sorry. Thanks
That's
for
all right.
hanging on.
Yep, sure.
Were you able to hear all of Jyoshin's talk?
Were you able to hear all of Jyoshin's talk?
Yes, and then
Okay.
I rambled on for a minute, but I don't
Oh,
know.
you did?
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't
Oh
know.
my
It's okay.
God.
It's totally
So
okay.
sorry.
It's all right. It's fine, honey.
Oh,
It's fine.
But
okay.
we're ready to listen.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to repeat what you said, we're here.
I was just saying I think it kind of comes down to many times surrendering instead of resisting, just, being in the moment and surrendering instead of just fighting it. Like even at the beginning of session, the first couple days, especially some of them are harder than others. And it's just, if you can just go in there and resist just what's coming up for you, or just being in the moment and surrendering to it just makes the world of difference, because as soon as you do, session becomes a lot easier. So, and I think that's day to day for us.
Dawn, it is so nice to hear you say that.
Yeah, I wish I'd learn it more often, more at the beginning of session instead of 2 or 3 days in.
Well, yeah, that probably would have felt better for you, but like just hearing you say that is like just a mark of how much practice you've done. We got about 5 minutes left. What else is coming up for
Okay,
folks?
well, I'll make a comment, which is in a different direction maybe,
Okay.
because you have the asceticism and then you have the indulgence, and I tend to be on the indulgent side.
Mhm.
And so if you ask the question, what do I need? Not what do I want, but what do I need? It might be helpful if I would keep that in mind, especially in terms of eating and some of the other activities that I have that are not needed, it's just indulgence.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
so that's a helpful question on that direction.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Oh, yeah,
That's
absolutely.
that difference between need and want.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
huge. For
Mhm.
me, it's huge.
Me too. I can very much relate to that.
Me too.
I am working on my health and working on losing weight, and which is it's it's work, and that's one of the big lessons that I have been learning is like, because for a long time I've been able to kind of eat whatever I want, because I was very athletic when I was younger and had a fast metabolism, and I never had to think about it. It was just like, it was no problem, and I ate whatever I wanted, like, and then just as I got older and less active, obviously, like, what happens? so I really had to learn that lesson, like, just what do I need right now? I mean, I don't need, cake. You know what I mean? Sometimes I want cake. And it's okay to want cake. It's okay to eat it. But, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to overdo it. Like, you have to kind of find that balance. You have to find the balance, because I think it is good to indulge and not be ascetic, but you do have to have balance. I mean, you just do, like.
And that question of what is needed, like on the aesthetic side, we'll bring in some of that loosening, and on the indulgent side, we'll bring in a little bit of that discipline.
Yes.
To help find the middle ground.
What was that, Trish?
To help find that middle ground.
Help find that middle ground.
I also like the distinction you made between phrasing what do I need and what is needed.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
That is
It's good. It's, like you said, it takes a lot of the judgment out and reduces the
There's an element to what is needed where I want often to tell you what we're going, you know, I don't really listen to what do you need, what do you want? I think I've already got the answer and I'm gonna put it on you, and that's really disruptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you need, Nancy, you need this.
Yeah. I see this need and we're gonna rush in and save you.
Yeah, I find the balance between indulgence and asceticism interesting because, you know, like, I keep thinking, well, I shouldn't be indulgent. I should just, you know, be strict with, you know, it's like the food thing, you know. I should only eat healthy food. And I was thinking of a friend of mine who's very good. She started an Overeaters Anonymous meeting up on the mountain. And it's the only meeting for 50 miles of Overeaters Anonymous. But she just came back. She went to Europe with her husband and her mother. And she said she had a few desserts. And she didn't feel like she really went overboard. But here she was in these other countries. And so, you know, I think you need a little indulgence sometimes. And sometimes you know, talking about the shoulds, you know, I shouldn't eat that cake. I should be eating a carrot stick.
For dessert.
But sometimes, you know, you're at a birthday party and somebody made a cake for the birthday party, and in those moments you should have a piece of cake because it would be rude not to, you know. Like,
And also it's tasted.
yeah, and also it tastes really good and you want it too. So
If we're looking at a spectrum, like where's that sliding point between indulgence and enjoyment?
yeah.
Yeah,
That's true. Did you say indulgence and enjoyment?
yeah.
Yeah, because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not always the same.
Yes.
Take
that's
it from
true.
me, you can binge on something and so you want to throw up, and that's not, it's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
No.
But it
Yeah.
certainly is indulgence.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm learning with this, you know, eating healthy thing. Because yeah, I mean, just that fine line between, because I can binge. Like I'm very like that's something that I have a big issue with. And yeah, so just finding that fine line there has been really helpful.
I think it's interesting to think about this not as like something broadly that can be applied to every aspect of my life, but like each individual thing. Like there are definitely aspects of my life where I lean indulgent, and there are definitely aspects of my life where I lean aesthetic, and like all of that could be brought in.
Costings that were at 8:15.
Oh,
yes. So full 2 hour.
Yeah.
The universe is the boundless sky, just as the lotus is not wooded by the water that surrounds it. The mind is immaculate and beyond the dust. Let us bow to the highest Lord. All Buddhists throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Parami.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out here, Jyoshin.
Very thoughtful.
Good night, John.
Good night, John.
Everybody. Good night.
Good night.
See you